We have a man who sits in the basement and makes all that happen.
The man in the basement.
He's actually in the basement. Okay, welcome everyone to the interviews for the Asheville City Council Planning and Zoning Commission. We will not be voting during this time. We're just going to have an opportunity to ask the candidates some questions, and we have a list. And the first candidate is Michael Speciale, and if you'll come forward. Maggie is our clerk. She will be keeping the clock. We're attempting to keep these to about 10-minute interviews, so a little bit of speed dating happening here. And do you want to do this?
Do you want to let him introduce
Want me to
himself?
start with a question?
Yes.
Or do we want him to like give a 30-second introduction and so on?
Well, you could, however you want to.
Oh, you want me to do them all? Okay.
Oh, no, I have some.
No,
Well-
we'll each ask questions. she's chairing. She's the
Oh, I understand.
as vice mayor.
Now I see. Okay.
Okay, yes.
So first we'll start with, can you give us a little information about yourself and why you're interested in this role?
Sure. So my name's Michael Corbin Speciale. I went to undergraduate school at North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina, and then graduate school at Auburn University, all the time thinking that I was going to become a city manager in my life. It's funny how we walk parallel lives. That never happened. And I got involved in government because I wanted to help folks. As naive as that sounds, that's still what I do today in general. And I'm here today simply because I'm involved in my community association, Shiloh Community Association, and want to bring my skills and life experiences to the table and help move the city of Asheville forward at the behest of the city council.
Okay, that sounds great. So I think what we're going to do is try and give every applicant 10 minutes or so. So I'll start with a question and then we can get as many as we are able to get in.
Sure.
So the first question I have for you is, when reviewing a conditional zoning request, how would you determine what conditions are reasonable to impose on the applicant to address potential community impacts while still ensuring the proposal's feasibility?
Okay, so would you repeat the
Yeah.
first part of the question again? Thank you.
Well, I can tell you where I'm getting at.
Okay,
How can you make sure in a conditional zoning process that you're balancing the needs of the applicant with some potential community concerns, while still making sure that the project itself ends up being feasible?
Right, so guided by city code and planning code would be the first place where you would start. Then I would assume staff would be giving recommendations. So leaning on those recommendations coupled with community input and engagement from the community and their points of view and perspectives. And with that, you come to some sort of reasonable consensus, hopefully, between the two. And kind of where I come from, rules are rules, and it's a conditional zoning request, so I would always fall back on the rule book, which would be
Okay,
the zoning ordinance.
okay. Anyone else have a question right now?
Sure, I'll pop in.
Okay.
Welcome, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise.
If confirmed, what would be your top 3 priorities as a commissioner over the next, say, 12 to 24 months? And how do they align with Asheville City Council's goals around housing, anti-displacement, and flood resilience and protections?
Right, so again, I mentioned it in my opening. As a member of the commission, we work at y'all's pleasure, which can be seen in item 2 of R in today's agenda meeting with the removal of someone. So with that being said, it's, I would see myself as a commissioner. My top 3 goals, would be to help the community grow at large, move forward the agenda of the council, and be a team player on the commission.
Thanks.
That was a good question. Thanks for being here and for applying. The City of Asheville is conducting an operational assessment of our transit system with a consulting firm, looking at ridership related to frequency of transit in comparison to coverage, which is basically what our model is right now. Transit is at the intersection of economic mobility, equitable access, and environmental stewardship, in addition to being a critical part of the affordability equation, including the cost of housing. So, how do you see the pros and cons of transit access related to land use and ways to leverage zoning decisions related to transit corridors and related transportation infrastructure?
You guys got a lot of words. So, and I'm not a person of many words, I prefer to listen. And so with that said, I think, you know, I've looked at and reviewed the transit study, and I think a lot of it weighs on the communities of most need and ridership, and utilizing that data to help augment or supplement whatever direction you want to go. So with increased housing, you know, clearly we need to start building up instead of out in Asheville, because we only have, you know, so much space to build. You know, the idea would be to figure out where high ridership areas are. We live in a service-oriented environment here with our tourism industry. So focusing on the housing of those folks and their needs would likely precipitate increased ridership, because they're the ones that are likely needing to ride the bus. I don't expect the doctor from Mission Hospital to be on the bus, and I'm sure there is one. So, you know, that's how I would, if I was, you know, at a perspective or a point of view in actually participating in that study, that's where I would go, is, well, where are high ridership areas, and is that in our R8 housing density districts, or, you know, other zoning that, you know, it's multi-use or something along those lines.
Thanks.
And let me just chime in. I'll try to do one with not quite as many words here, because there's a lot of, what do you think are the biggest planning challenges our community is facing right now?
Yeah, housing and traffic are big. You know, as an everyday citizen that is out here on the streets, being able to get from one place to another in a timely fashion is very hard. I give kudos to whichever civil engineer did the light timing down 25, because, you know, Long Shoals is really the only place you can get caught up. So with that being said, traffic issues and, you know, I know housing's been a big issue for, you know, since I moved here back in 2011. I've moved away since then, but back again. And unfortunately, when you're in mountain towns, there's just not a lot of places to build homes. And so you have to, you know, planning, and I'm sure it's some of y'all's idea too, is to build up as well as out. But that's where I see the need is in traffic reduction and affordable housing.
Bear, do you have a question?
I'm just listening.
Okay. Anyone else, any other questions?
Where are we on? I could do another one.
He still has a green light.
Yeah.
All right, I'll pop in on
Okay,
that.
go ahead.
I'm trying to get different than the ones I just said. Never mind, someone else go.
Well, I do have one. Do you have any creative solutions to bring to the table when you see us wrestling with the complex challenges like anti-displacement? If the table is set, do you have a fresh dish?
Heard.
What's the question again? Say that again.
With regards to anti-displacement, I'm glad to see that you've fully recovered from your ailment and losing our soul. Glad
Oh,
you're back up here.
thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I was there. Anti-displacement. You know, in my travels, I've seen this a lot, to be quite honest. People that have been here, been fixtures, and then getting priced out, have to move out, or their children, you know, inheriting the property and they've already left. And with that said, like, I think it's educational opportunities that tie into what's already here in the city. And, you know, one of the major employers is over there on the hill, and another major employer is on this hill. So figuring out how to use community colleges, and I mean, it's hard to tie a liberal arts university in, I guess you could here with the city, but I would start at the base level of, you know, grabbing kids coming out of high school and trying to channel them into particular, for lack of better words, apprenticeship programs, training programs that allow them to stay here in Asheville and not move to major cities in North Carolina.
Just a warning, this is gonna beep at you when it turns, but it's beeping at us really, so.
Yeah.
So,
Nothing personal. Any other questions? Okay.
right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next is Seth Conley.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this role.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Seth Connolly. I'm over a 20-year resident of Buncombe County, and I'm a small business owner and real estate agent. I live in West Asheville
Okay.
with my family, and reason I'm here is because I've seen the arc of Asheville over the last couple decades, and generally arcing towards positive. I think what the city has become over the last 20 years is really beautiful, and we've seen a lot of upside, but we've also seen a lot of challenges, and we're in a unique time in Asheville's history that we've always been challenged with, especially when it relates to housing, is supply and demand. And we've had high demand, low supply, but now we're at an inflection point due to both Helene and maybe macro issues where we actually have more supply than we do demand. We have a lot of empty apartment buildings that have been, you know, green-lighted and developed over the past few years, and the economic climate of how a lot of those big projects came about has also shifted. So I think we have a unique opportunity to implement parts of the missing middle study and other developments to continue to make this city great in its next 10 years and beyond.
Sounds like you've reviewed the missing middle study.
A little bit, yeah.
What's your favorite part of the missing middle study?
What's that?
What's your favorite part of the missing middle study? Like, which would you recommend?
Yeah, I
removing
think
first?
a big opportunity specifically related to housing is we've seen a lot of big high-rise developments, you know, often building up, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to be unlocked in smaller lots, in denser corridors, you know, rezoning for flag lots and ADUs, and not necessarily loosening the rules, but also making it easier for folks, especially I think with the anti-displacement goals, that looking at how legacy homeowners can unlock some equity and maybe streamline that process, because so often these, you know, bureaucratic processes of rezoning and doing that are hard, so they don't know how to unlock that equity or, you know, create value in that property necessarily, especially when it comes to taxes, which, you know, by developing we can create new tax revenue for the city.
Okay. I like that answer. Anyone else want to jump in with a question?
Sure. I'm gonna ask a little different than what I had done before, but when balancing housing needs, environmental protection, and neighborhood concerns, what principles guide you in your decision-making? Because that's always gonna be intention, right? And we have a lot of goals as a council and as a community around those. So just talk to me a little bit about principles that guide your decision-making around that.
Absolutely. I am a late-to-life Quaker, actually, and one of the principles that we have in the Quaker practice is equity and stewardship. And I think those are two kind of cornerstones of any development or progress to make in the city, because the goal is to make it better, right? And we can't make it better by just throwing out, you know, the consequences of some of these actions. A lot of the decisions we make in the city and on planning and zoning and all of it do have, you know, downside risk as well. So balancing equity and stewardship, specifically as we recover from Hurricane Helene.
Thank you.
So then we're going to go, but in your first answer, you mentioned legacy homeowners. I'm wondering what your definition of a legacy homeowner is. Is that someone who's lived there 5 years, 10 years?
Well, I think,
Just
you know,
curious.
specifically as it relates to like legacy neighborhoods, like East End, South Side, some of where
Oh.
we're seeing a lot of like displacement and gentrification. Because, you know, we look at, as a real estate agent, you know, I'm looking at the real estate market every day. And what are the areas that are most affordable to maybe build in some of these places that are not suburban, but within the city limits?
Gotcha.
And those are gonna be legacy African-American Black neighborhoods. And we've seen it, West Asheville, Burton Street, I-26, how neighborhoods like that are impacted through different decisions, so.
Okay, understood. Kim, sorry.
I'll be asking the same question of everyone, so ready for a wordy one. So the city of Asheville is conducting an operational assessment of our transit system with a consulting firm, looking at ridership related to frequency and transit in comparison to coverage. The coverage map closely matches our current system. Transit is the intersection of economic mobility, equitable access, and environmental stewardship, in addition to being a critical part of affordability as part of the housing cost equation. How do you see the pros and cons of transit access related to land use and ways to leverage zoning decisions related to transit corridors and related transportation infrastructure?
I would think that transit would need to be a high priority, especially for new developments. Our city, the way it's laid out, is kind of on this weird T, right? So where people live and how they get to and from places is different than a lot of other cities. We have the Biltmore right in the middle, right, this big landmass. So transit is important whether you're coming from west to east or north to south, and where the jobs are and where the housing is all intersects. So I don't think we can kind of talk about one without the other.
Okay, all right. Can you tell me what you think the purpose of a planning and zoning commission is in a community?
Well, yeah, the plan, the master plan of UDO is the, rules put in place to, have a good quality of life. The zoning is the implementation of those laws. So I believe that the purpose of this committee is to get input from people who have lived experience, professional experience, citizens, property owners, taxpayers, to help advise and guide some of the rezoning and different conditional zoning requests that you see come across your desk.
Okay. Any other?
How are we doing on time?
Okay. I can, oh, go ahead.
Flood resilience is a growing concern. And we have I think at one point I heard 10% of our property is in flood risk areas. How would you approach a community, us thinking about that? Because I suspect it'll come across planning and zoning at some point of, are we gonna look at zoning changes in those areas? What are your thoughts on how we navigate that?
Yeah, there's a lot to it. Helene has shown us that, areas that we would never even imagine being impacted by flooding are indeed. And you have, different stakeholders in that, even within the city of Asheville, like Biltmore Village and River Arts District, where a lot of city-owned property is, but also private property. You see like the foundation. So I guess it's on a case-by-case basis, because we really have to approach each piece of property like that, especially when it comes to like the River Arts District, where there's a mix of public and private. And ultimately that's a quality of life issue, because that's kind of the main hub for so many people recreating and playing. So it also would have to be a key component of, moving forward.
Any other questions? I can give another one if you want. I'll go with the first question I asked before. When reviewing a conditional zoning request, how would you determine what conditions are reasonable to impose on the applicant to address potential community impacts while still ensuring the proposal's feasibility?
It is a case-by-case scenario, because scale and scope of project are gonna impact it quite a bit when we're talking about maybe, conditional zoning for a cottage cluster or a duplex or triplex, or something like the Meadows at Hawk Creek, and some of those guiding principles and how we approach that, I think specifically would refer back to some of the goals and vision statements for the city and how those intersect, similar to what happened with some of the revisions with the Meadows at Hawk Creek.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? Okay. Oh, do you? Go ahead.
No, I'm,
Thanks, Seth.
I think we have,
That's one.
okay. 1 minute?
We got any fresh ideas to bring to the table, maybe around ambulance placement or in general? We're wrestling with some big issues.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to recognize that Asheville has been blessed by a lot of development and progress over the past many years, but this is a unique time for us to, we're not in an inventory deficit. The amount of people who want to live and work here, there's way more houses available, there's way more apartments available than there has been in 2 decades for the supply and demand. So I think looking at it through that lens and understanding that, quality of life for the citizens has to be a focus, because so much of our development has been focused on the tourist experience and how to bring more tourists here. So I think focusing on the quality of life for the residents through that.
Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Conley.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Jonathan Anzolito. And please correct me if I'm saying your name incorrectly.
You got it. Don't overpronounce it.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So begin with telling us why you want to serve in this capacity.
Sure thing. I did also want to start. I have assisted hearing. I have cochlear implants. I'm having a little difficulty hearing in this room. So if y'all could do me a favor, just talk a little
Okay.
closer to the mic, that would be great. Yes, my name is Jonathan Anzolito. I'm a city planner by trade. I have a background that specializes in land use and zoning specifically. I actually used to work for the company that had done the River Arts District zoning overlay and the Haywood Avenue zoning overlay. I'm interested in zoning. I'm drawn to zoning because I think that in a long list of drivers for the general housing crisis, I think zoning is actually quite near the top. And so that was kind of the impetus for my desire to study it and then to go into that field, because I think for a problem as deep and entrenched as zoning, I think that you have to have a deep understanding of it so that you can work toward solutions, which I believe that I have an understanding for.
Okay. So, and perhaps I should have asked Mr. Conley this, but we ran out of time. He mentioned that this is an interesting time where we have more supply than we usually have relative to demand.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that is in fact a fact, would that change your analysis for potential zoning matters or conditional zoning matters that might come before you?
It would weigh into the consideration, certainly. I think that the reasons like our comprehensive plans are 20 years, 30 years in the future is that there needs to be kind of an understanding of how the longer term. And so right now I agree, and I actually do think that the supply is being outpaced by demand. But 3 years ago it was the complete opposite in a very profound way. So I think that having an understanding of what is it going to be in 10 years is maybe a different calculus for it. We should, yes, in 10 years we might just need to stay the course on what we were planning, big picture wise.
Okay. And in keeping with the order that we
Sure.
established.
You got it, boss.
Now,
If confirmed, what would be your top 3 priorities to bring to the table, and how would they align with, let me get back in the mic. If you're appointed, what would be your top 3 priorities, and how would they align with City Council's goals around housing, anti-displacement, and flood resilience?
Absolutely. I think, top 3 for me would be housing affordability. I think commercial affordability for retail. And then in general, I think creating spaces for businesses and then to create job creators. How that fits in with affordable housing is that I think that we need to create more housing, specifically affordable housing. And then do that in places like in the comprehensive plan that we've already outlined should be ripe for redevelopment, which would also, I think, intersect with which parts of town currently are resilient to, in the last year, we discovered a lot of parts of town are a little bit more prone to flooding than we were anticipating. And I think if we can build a little bit more densely in certain areas, like perhaps like in big box commercial areas, I think that makes sense for how to develop without displacing anyone at the same time.
Kim?
The City of Asheville is conducting an operational assessment of our transit system, working with a consulting firm, and looking at ridership related to frequency of transit in comparison to coverage, which closely matches our current transit system. Transit is at the intersection of economic mobility, environmental stewardship, and equitable access, in addition to being a key part of the equation for housing affordability. So how do you see the pros and cons of transit-related access to land use and ways of zoning decisions could be related or leveraged along transit corridors and related transportation infrastructure?
Okay. I just want to be sure I heard the last piece of it is can you repeat the last part of your question?
Sure, I guess the spirit of the question is, how can we leverage land use on transit corridors?
Absolutely. I think that's pretty critical. I would say that I think obviously like access is tantamount to the way that we are thinking about housing. We want to be creative. In my opinion, want to create cities that are beneficial for people who need to use transit, not people who are just choosing to use transit instead of using their car that day. And so I think having having a little bit more deeper affordability and transit oriented development or along those corridors is important, so that it is not just people who are choosing not to drive their car, it is people who are car free instead of car less. Or I got that reversed, but and so I think that is tantamount with the way that we think about how to go out that area.
So looking at your resume, it looks like you've done some housing work in Austin, which is, some respects our big sister city, but hopefully not with a full-fledged housing crisis. But in your experience there or anywhere really, have you been a part of a decision-making process that was really difficult, where reasonable minds could disagree? And if so, how did you handle resolving that, making a decision in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're maybe referring to, I worked as a housing policy for Council District 9, which is downtown, the University of Texas, and then south of the river, and then just east of Interstate 35.
My trader of his sister just moved there.
Hey, wait. You're still family though. So I think while I was there, I was on the policy team that did a couple of pretty big wins. We eliminated parking minimums, and then I was doing a lot of quantitative analysis as the primary part of my role for, we established 3 units by right. So for single family, homes that are zoned for single family, you're allowed to put up to 3 units on your lot. And so
Up to three.
That's correct. You guys
Wow.
has 3. And so that obviously no 2 people felt the same way about that. And so it was a great learning experience for me. I had a boss, Melissa, who was really excelled at negotiating and at bringing people together and then hearing different opinions and then getting people to make sure that everyone felt heard, and that we came to a conclusion on how the city can progress. My personal opinion, and I believe it was the opinion of that office as well, is that cities are living organisms, and then no neighborhood should feel too much change or too little change. Then you have to have a historical lens for how all of that works, and that and so there was a lot. This was like a years-long process. A decade long.
We're
process
familiar with
for-
that, yes.
Yeah. So
So you're cool with that, excellent.
so I'm cool with that. I would love it if that process hurried up, but I think I would say that there's a lot of education and a lot of listening and a lot of talking and discussing that goes into that process, and then I think that was a big piece of it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
I feel like
no,
okay.
yeah, thank you.
I can do another question if anyone else want to
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
It looks like you guys have a script.
Well,
No,
no,
we're just kind of
I'll
rolling
do
with
the
it.
one around,
Go ahead. No,
okay.
You too.
And I think this builds on kind of the question the mayor was just asking, but puts a point on it of, we have tensions around our housing needs, our environmental protection, and neighborhood concerns. Talk to me about principles that guide your decision-making when there's those tensions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's like a sliding scale, or the way I think about it is kind of a sliding scale between affordability, housing inventory, and then design. I think that all of those kind of need to be calibrated depending on context. I think, like I was trying to allude to Councilmember Roney's question about areas that have high access to grocery stores, jobs, transit. I think affordability should be highly prioritized. I think in areas where, like I maybe mentioned earlier about big box areas that are getting redeveloped, that is not displacing anyone, and then we just infill on parking lots, I think housing inventory should be prioritized, and then design has its time and place. I would say principles-wise, but I would say that, you know, everything has to have a historical context to it. If this, you can't make decisions agnostic from history. And so I think if you are considering an affluent neighborhood that has experienced no change, you're getting a lot of pushback, I think there's a way to handle that, opposed to maybe a neighborhood that has experienced a lot of change and is giving you pushback. And so I think based on, there's different contexts, and I think that I would calibrate accordingly, case by case.
Thanks.
That's about to,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, she
Yeah.
just saved me from the buzzer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
I don't know, Lindsay Buthel? Nope.
Maggie, do you know did she confirm her?
I'll go
interview?
run and make sure we didn't lose somebody, and you'll.
Do you want me to go ahead and
Yeah,
move
go
on
ahead
to
with
Randall?
Randall.
Okay, Randall Barnett? Good afternoon.
Hello, hello.
Uh,
It's good to be here.
It's good to see
I've
you.
been here many times.
Go
In
ahead
fact-
and,
In fact, I've been here for affordable housing things and y'all have voted it, well, not you guys.
mhm.
Decades ago, voted against it, but we live with it, we go with it.
So go ahead and
Okay,
tell us a little bit about yourself and what interests you.
I
Oh.
want to get sentimental.
Okay.
And I don't want to make this a gimmick, but this is the reason we're here. Byron Griner lost his life, and this seat is open now because of that. He was a friend of mine. I served with him at LOTSAR, Land to Sky Regional Council, and I learned a lot from him. And I would be proud to serve on his seat. I know his seat is a year left, so that's what we're going for today.
Mhm.
But that's my first statement.
Okay.
Okay, and you know that I've worked here for the city of Asheville in the planning and zoning department for a couple of decades, but it was a couple of decades ago. And I know some of you may have read the Asheville Watchdog and saw my interview, so I am against displacement, even though if you look on my records, I was one of the ones that did it. But that's like 40 years ago, so I feel good about
When you
what
were doing it, did you feel
about
like
what
it
I
was the?
said. I worked in urban renewal.
Okay.
That's what I did for the Planning and Zoning Community Development Division. So I
Well,
figured,
then, I have questions.
I
I'm
figured-
listening now.
I figured y'all have read the Asheville Watchdog and maybe align my name. Oh, he's coming up here.
I hadn't, but thanks for bringing that to my attention. At the time, when you were working through urban renewal, did you believe in your bones that it was the right thing to do for those neighborhoods in particular?
I made some really close friends with the people that I worked with. And I felt good getting to know them and helping them personally. Looking back, I see the problem that I shocked their roots because they had to move somewhere else. Now I'm talking East End Valley Street, not East Riverside. There were bad problems with East Riverside. And hopefully I learned from that. So in East End Valley Street, helped a lot of good people get into good housing.
Okay. So I'll give you the first question that I had prepared. How about that?
Okay.
So, actually, I'll give you another one. In light of recent damage to parks, neighborhoods, and infrastructure caused by Helene, what strategies would you prioritize in zoning proposals to ensure future resiliency and growth?
Well, of course, the zoning laws are there to protect development from happening on the dangerous places. I remember back in the day when they were looking for a new place to put the Civic Center, one of the places that was a site on the list was where Muni Golf Course is. That was just underwater about 30 feet. So there are laws to protect us, and that's what the zoning laws are for. So our job would be for compliance, to make sure that everyone is complying to the rules that we have set forward already.
Maggie?
All right, where are my questions? It's nice to see you, Randall.
Yeah, I was Maggie's realtor
He was.
years ago.
And my husband, they work together at On Track. So we just talked a little bit, I appreciate that question, Antoinette, about flood resilience. If confirmed, what would be your top 3 priorities for your role on planning and zoning, and how they align to Asheville's housing, anti-displacement, and flood resilience goals, which I think we're talking about a lot, but what would you drive forward?
Well, I would be accountable to your goals, of course, and accountable to the citizens of Asheville to promote the best growth, sustainable growth that is needed. So my goal would be aligned with what you are, because after it leaves planning and zoning, it probably will come to you. So we want to make the best decision so you can have the best decision in front of you.
Thanks.
The City of Asheville is conducting an operational assessment of their transit system with a consulting firm looking at the ridership related to frequency in comparison to coverage, which closely matches our current system. Transit's at the intersection of economic mobility, equitable access, and environmental stewardship, while also being a key part of the equation of affordability with the cost of housing. How do you see the pros and cons of transit access related to land use, and ways to leverage zoning decisions related to transit corridors and related transportation infrastructure?
Wow, that's a mouthful. And I've heard that question about 3 times already. So I remember several times, well, not several times, but an example would be Mountain Housing gets approved for a really, really nice affordable housing development, but it's not near the bus line. So the first thing we would do is align whoever's doing the transportation study and needs would align with our transportation planners and the busing organization to make sure they align, so we have help there with the people being able to get where they want to get to. Another thing,
Can I ask a follow-up?
another thing that I do when I have someone that likes a house, I tell them to go in the morning when you're going to go to work and drive the commute. So that would be a good thing to know about. Planning studies would tell us, so we would be able to make a good decision.
I know you acknowledged that it was some time ago, but because you worked for the city's planning department, can you tell us what it used to look like to plot a land use development in proximity to transit? Because there's some of the infrastructure, like walkability, seems to be missing over a long period of time.
Yeah, in fact, we have some bridges over the highway that nobody uses anymore. So that would be what an expert professional would put before us, and we would judge that to make a decision. We wouldn't be designing it. A professional would tell us what the best decision to make, and the board would be helping to make those decisions. We could send them back to the drawing board, and they come with a better thing and say, do this, you might get passed with this idea. But the professionals are gonna tell us what the best thing is, and we make a decision for the citizens to protect them. That's how I see it.
Thanks.
Okay. Esther?
Oh, thank you. So was your boss Gerald Green when you were with the city? Was he the planning director?
He was a
Or was
coworker.
it Julia?
Yeah, Julia, yeah.
And then he came after her, right?
He was a coworker. Scott Shuford was,
You should just ask Maggie all everything.
I mean, I'm trying to remember when I clerked here, so.
I remember you.
When I was a kid up there.
I did, I remember you were an intern here.
Yeah, back was like 97 or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so switching gears, I have a question about the.
I had black hair.
Okay, it's all coming back to me. And just talking about the planning and zoning meetings themselves, how would you handle emotional or contentious public comment? Like, how would you react to that?
Because we had to deal with NIMBYs. That's the buzzword. And the NIMBYs, what you have to look at, they could have their good ideas, but if they're going at the angle for classism or racism, we need to be able to identify that so they don't get their way. They may be just trying to get their way for property values and things like that. But I have to come up with a balance of growth and sustainability would be what I would be trying to make a decision for. But we do have to be careful with what the public throws at us and know that that's a NIMBY idea. That's just not good for the city.
So along those lines, the question that I've asked before, I believe dovetails quite nicely with the mayor's question, which was, well, my question is, when reviewing a conditional zoning request, how would you determine what conditions are reasonable to impose on the applicant to address potential community impacts and concerns while still ensuring that the proposal remains feasible?
We will get negative impacts on almost any decision. So we have to weigh how many positive impacts we're gonna have versus the negative. So someone's gonna have to accept some negative, but it's gonna have to be good for the most amount of people and the goals that you have set for us to follow. So we have to be fair.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hit time. Thank you, Randall.
No other hard questions?
No, that's it.
We ran
Okay.
along.
Well, thank you very much. Am I allowed?
No, we actually
Yeah,
were
I
going
found
back.
Lindsay in
Okay.
the hall, so she.
So I want to ask a favor. I guess we can do it after this if y'all don't hurry up. I wanted to get a picture of me holding Byron to take back to our office.
I'll do it with you after.
Do it after,
I'll help
if
you.
you don't rush
Yeah, I'll
out.
help you.
Could I do that?
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
would love that too.
Thank
Thanks, Randall. What a
you.
nice idea.
And Lindsay Bruthel, am I saying that right? Broll. I apologize. I apologize. Thank you.
I'm wondering, okay.
Thank you, thank
Appreciate
you.
you asking.
Good to see you. So let's start by giving us a little bit about your background and why you're interested.
Sure, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. My name is Lindsay Broll. I've lived in Asheville for just under 10 years. It'll be 10 years next summer. And my background originally professionally is in urban planning and policy. I have a master's degree in urban planning and policy, and started out my career doing a little bit of land use planning, particularly, this was in the Chicago region at the time before I lived in Asheville, but I worked at an organization that provided technical assistance for communities in the region to develop comprehensive plans, zoning ordinance updates. So I actually helped to develop some code while I worked at that job, like actual language for zoning ordinance updates. I also did a little bit of economic development work. It was a public-private partnership that I worked at in the Chicago region for a time, specifically working on trying to leverage infrastructure for purposes of economic development, working with utilities to try to help coordinate with private sector companies to try to test new technologies and help spur local business and small business growth. And then now, in my current role for the last about almost 10 years, I've worked as a renewable energy developer. So I particularly work in development. So I am responsible for zoning solar projects in particular across the country. I've done a lot of that in North Carolina as well, in a number of different counties in the state. And so I have a bit of the perspective of both from the government and public sector side and also from the developer side and the challenges of meeting difficult codes or meeting conditions that could potentially kill a project, but also understand the side of needing to write and code that meets with your community's intentions of how to develop responsibly, use the zoning ordinance as a tool for economic development and for affordability and for the priorities of the community. So I would just say that's a little bit about my background. I know it's kind of long-winded. I think particularly after Helene, I felt a strong need to want to participate more civically in the community and try to use some of my background and expertise to help the city recover and rebuild in a responsible way. And when I saw this opening, that's exactly what came to mind. I said, oh, maybe I should put my hat in the ring.
Okay, thank you for that. And since you mentioned Helene, I'll ask you this question. In light of the recent damage to parks, neighborhoods, and infrastructure caused by Helene, what strategies would you prioritize in zoning proposals to ensure future resiliency and growth?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind with, a zoning ordinance, one of the biggest tools you have is to think about use. And I think in the floodplains, we need to be really thoughtful about what kind of uses we put in those areas. Things that gas stations or other uses that could contaminate, is that an appropriate use to put in a floodplain that maybe it's a 100-year floodplain, but maybe that's flooding a lot more frequently than every 100 years now. So I think use is something we really need to think about. At the same time, the reason why there's more, affordable land in some areas is because it's in a floodplain. And so we don't want to, I think, over-regulate those areas to an extent that it, prevents, artists or small businesses or other folks from being able to get their foot in the door because they have a more affordable option. And so I think it's a really tough balance to strike. I think we do need to protect our community and, in the sense of can we foot the bill every time this happens? And can we expect this federal government and the state government to step up in the same way? Maybe not. So I think we need to think about, the costs of recovery and be a little smarter about how, in terms of just trying to guide what appropriate uses can go there. At the same time, I really think it's essential to not, over-regulating, cause, for example, gentrification or preventing, some of our key cultural assets, small businesses and artists, and for example, from being able to thrive in the community.
Okay, well, I appreciate that thoughtful response. Maggie?
Yeah. Lindsay, nice to see you.
You too.
When balancing housing needs, environmental protection, and neighborhood concerns, what principles would guide your decision-making?
So I think I think we have to have sort of a bit of a North Star when we think about the zoning ordinance overall as a tool. It's one of the strongest tools that the city has. At the same time, we don't want it to be, so deterministic that it's exclusionary or that it, zoning hasn't always had the best history of how it's been utilized as a tool. And so, again, I think there's a really nuanced balance to strike between, being really prescriptive in an ordinance versus really sort of trying to provide guardrails so that we can ensure some key North Star items like affordability, accessibility through multiple transportation modes, and things like stormwater, for example, these sort of interconnected pieces. It's not just about, I kind of think of it like, one of those, if you've ever seen one of those posters where it's like pixelated and it's actually made up of a bunch of little different images. It's like you have to be able to stand back and make sure that, you know, you can see that there's enough access to certain areas through transit or through roadways. You have to make sure that there's enough areas for affordability, that there's enough industrial uses for jobs, that there's economic development. And so I think there's some key, like, kind of North Star things you have to keep in mind when assessing these projects, particularly affordability. Transportation, I think, is a key one. I think stormwater is a really key one, you know, to ensure that we're not causing worse flooding than we might already be seeing. And economic development being the last one.
Kim?
You hinted at this one, so it may be an opportunity to expand. The City of Asheville is conducting an operational assessment of our transit system with a consultant firm looking at ridership related to frequency versus coverage, which matches what we're doing now. Transit is at the intersection of economic mobility, equitable access, and environmental stewardship, while also being part of the equation for affordability in addition to the cost of housing. How do you see the pros and cons of transit access related to land use and ways to leverage zoning decisions related to transit corridors and related transportation infrastructure?
Yeah, great question. I think land use and transportation really can't be separated. They're two sides of the same coin. I think really we should try to be concentrating density around areas that have the most transportation access and what's the right word? Like the most room for growth in terms of transportation access. And so, you know, I think we need to be thinking about our transportation corridors and our transit corridors as resources in that way when looking at land use and ensuring that we are also, you know, when developers come in and if they're asking for hundreds and hundreds of housing units, that they're helping, you know, to provide and pave the way that and to help support the transit that we need in those areas. Yeah, and I think that isn't, you have to look at that in a nuanced way. It can't just be access, you know, like, is there a line here? It needs to be like, how frequently is that coming? Can this serve the needs of where, like, let's think about where people in this development might need to go or get to. You know, it's not just like, is there a line on the map that shows a bus there? There's a lot of nuance there in terms of like you're saying, the frequency of the routes or the destinations and access to those places and multiple types of uses. Like, you know, can folks, is even parking too? Like, is there enough of that? Is there enough, you know, do we need an extra stoplight here for safety, for pedestrian access, that kind of thing?
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. First, I want to know, why is it called Chicagoland?
Great question. When I first moved there, I was like, is this Disneyland or is it a city?
Right. My brother lives there. I'm always like, what? There's no other city that's whatever land. But,
I know.
so if you could just tell me, and I'm looking through, I actually just for all the candidates had this one question ready to ask you about your relevant professional and community experience that you bring. But anyway, forget that question because all of you are amazingly qualified for this job. So, if you would tell me what you think our biggest challenges from a planning standpoint in this city right now.
That's a good
Simple question like that.
That's a really good question. There's a few things that are coming to mind.
And there's not obviously a right answer to this.
Yeah, I think I think housing and affordability is the first thing that comes to mind. But I obviously am also thinking about resiliency in light of Helene. You know, just I think this is a real opportunity for us to, you know, kind of chart a new course and rebuild. And, you know, the community really came together in an incredible way during and after Helene. And I think, you know, we have the opportunity to kind of build on that momentum. And you know, obviously it's put us in a very challenging position in a lot of ways, but I also just think there's a ton of opportunity in this moment as well. And I want to ensure that we are able to meet that, both particularly, I think, with, you know, affordability and maintaining affordability in the city, and also resiliency as we do that as well. So I think those are the first things that come to mind.
I know our time ran out. Maggie politely
did?
turned off her
Good answer.
light.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was like, we can do another one.
Great
Well, thank
answers,
you.
everyone.
Yeah, great
Thanks,
answers.
everyone.
Really
you.
appreciate the
Really
opportunity.
appreciate your time.
So we'll be voting tonight,
Stage
if you want to stay up late, because I believe it's at the end of our agenda.
It is, and also Julie O'Dwyer has sent all of us.
So, yeah, she sent us an email.
If you'd like to read her email, she's been watching online.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's good.
And then Maggie, could you take a picture of us with?
I got you, yeah.
Do you want to do this now?
Where do you want us?